There will be great changes in 2026 for the world, for Brazil in particular, and for you individually. Actually, this crystal ball is too bright. That's actually a lamp. So I think I'm going to switch this off. Okay, enough of that. I might just find it funny that if you search for predictions for 2026 on YouTube, you'll find thousands of videos of YouTubers making loads of predictions. And most of them start off by saying that in 2026 they're going to be great changes. But then if you look back at their videos for 2025, 2024, they say the same thing. Great changes are going to happen in that year. Now, I'm not criticizing them, I just find it a bit funny. In my main prediction for 2026, it will be the same shit as 2025, with a couple of differences. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not all negative and pessimistic. I think 2026 can be a great year for many individuals. But if you look at it globally or nationally, it's going to carry on as it did in 2025. It's going to be a bit chaotic politically, economically. Unfortunately, be a new crisis somewhere in the world, God knows where, and there always is. And people in general are going to feel that their lives are improving. And unfortunately, it's probably going to be opposite, and people feel that it's getting harder and harder. But don't worry, this isn't a depressing video. There'll be lots of people that have a great 2026. I'm also looking forward to it. So what I'm going to do now is go through some specific predictions and share how I'm planning to deal with these to make sure that 2026 is a great year. And the first one is elections. So Brazil will have presidential elections in 2026. In October time, and I'm not going to predict who's going to win it. At the moment, the two frontrunners are Lula, who's the current president, and then Flavio Bolsonaro, who is the son of the ex-president. But I don't like talking politics, but one thing I will predict is that 2026 is going to be a bit crazy. It's going to get a bit chaotic here in Brazil. People are going to start arguing with each other, friends, family, and everything's going to be politicized, and yeah, it's just going to be a bit crazy. But the same thing happens in many other countries when they have their elections. But I think there is a clear trend generally when it comes to politics and elections. So if you look at just an average person in Brazil or the US or Europe, they are suffering a bit. They're seeing housing and cost of living increasing a lot, while their salaries are not keeping up. And so many are struggling to afford to keep their current lifestyle, and they can't afford to buy a house, so they're stuck renting. And that's taking a big toll on people. And many, they look to the government to solve this. But unfortunately, the governments around the world aren't going to solve this. That could be because they don't want to, because a lot of the politicians are rich, so they don't want to make changes, because that could affect them and they're in a good position. Or you have other politicians who do want to make changes to try and help the average person, but they haven't got the political power or the votes to actually make fundamental changes. So what happens during the election is that different parties, they promise they're going to do this and that's going to solve the cost of living crisis and all of this. But then they get into power and the solutions don't solve the problem, or they can't even implement those solutions. And then the general population starts getting frustrated with the government. So in the next election, they vote for another party who promises to fix it in a different way, but then it just carries on with that party not being able to solve it. And so then the population votes for another party. And so then the result is that countries are just constantly changing political parties who are in power, because no one can solve the fundamental issue, which is this cost of living crisis. Now, I'm not saying that elections and voting aren't important. I'm just saying that I personally have changed my mindset in that I don't think anymore that the government are they going to help me financially. And I think there's just one person that can fix my financial problems, and that's me. And I'm going to talk more about that in the next section. Okay, so the next prediction is on the economy. So the Brazilian economy is forecast to grow by about 1.8% in 2026, compared to 2.5% in 2025. And that's not horrible, but it's not great. So if you look at this chart here showing GDP growth by country, you should look at the blue bar, which is 2026. You can see Brazil there, it's close to Australia and the US. Now these numbers are a bit different because they were done back in July 2025. So they're not the latest forecasts, but you can see that Brazil is kind of surrounded by these countries. But because Brazil isn't as developed as Australia and the US and so on, ideally it needs to have a higher GDP growth than those other countries like the US and Australia and Europe in order to be in a good economic position. But to be honest, I don't really look at these GDP growth figures that much. But in my opinion, the figures that are more important to the average person are inflation figures. So inflation figures for 2026 for Brazil is forecast to be around 4%, the same as 2025. And you can see that if you look at the orange line at the bottom of this graph. And if you look at this chart here, which compares inflation figures for countries around the world. Now, Brazil isn't on here for some reason, but if it was, it'd be near the top, around Chile and Colombia. And you can see that the US and many of the big European countries are much, much lower and have a much lower inflation rate. But you shouldn't be fooled by these inflation figures because they're an average, and so many things, food, rent, and so on, many of these are increasing by much more than the inflation figure. And then also the other thing is that salary increases aren't keeping up with inflation. And so on a net basis, people are actually worse off. And like I said, many people look to the government to solve this, but it's such a complicated issue and needs such fundamental changes that governments aren't capable of solving it. And so individually, you need to fix it for yourself. And obviously there are many ways of doing that. You can work harder, so you can work really hard at your job, really trying to get a promotion and a higher salary. Or you can get a second job as well and work 2 jobs. And yeah, there are many people who are capable of doing that, and that's great. I personally did not have the energy or the motivation to do either of those. But then another solution is, instead of trying to work harder, you try and work smarter. But in order to do that, for me, I had to change my mindset. So I was kind of brainwashed by friends and family giving me all this advice. But then I realized one day, my friends and family, they can't sort out their own lives. So why the hell are they giving me advice? I mean, I had relatives who, worked in jobs they hated until they were 65, saying that they're going to enjoy their lives once they're retired, but then their health deteriorates and they're not able to do the things they're planning to do. And their pensions weren't as big as they had hoped, and so they don't have the money either to do the things they want to do. And then these people are giving me advice saying, oh yeah, you need to work really hard until you're 65 and then you can enjoy your life. And I'm like looking at them going, what are you talking about? And then I had friends giving me advice about, how I should try and go for the promotion so I can buy a bigger house and a bigger car. But then I looked at my friends and I'm like, don't you have a massive mortgage, a car loan, and you got credit card debt as well? And I was thinking about, you guys are stuck in this debt trap where you're having to work really hard to pay all this debt off and the interest, and it doesn't leave much money for other things. And I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't be giving me advice. And so my financial situation only improved once I stopped listening to all this stupid advice I was being given and kind of stopped being brainwashed and realized, actually, no, I don't need a massive house or a really posh car. And yeah, and cutting back on those things, that will definitely help your finances. By my personal experience, it's not going to have that big impact that you need in terms of cutting costs. In order to do that, you need to do something more drastic. So that might involve moving to a different part of the country, where the cost of living is cheaper. So any Brazilians watching this, moving from a big city to the countryside, that can have a big impact on your cost of living. And for those of you watching this video outside of Brazil, you might consider moving country to a country that has a lower cost of living. I mean, it doesn't have to be Brazil. There are many countries out there in Asia, South America. Even certain countries in Europe have significantly lower cost of living. In my personal experience, if you're living in a high cost of living city or country, and you move to a different area where the cost of living is a lot lower, that will drastically reduce your cost of living and improve your life. Obviously, you can't just, quit your job and move somewhere else without first working out how you're going to make money in this new country or area. It all depends on the person, what qualifications they have, what experiences they have, and what their interests are. But for most, it's going to be something online, be that social media, be that consulting, be that teaching, or investing like me. And there are many opportunities for generating income and wealth with investing. I would say that the US stock market is probably the best, in which anyone can invest in. So if you're Swedish or Brazilian, or from most other countries, you can set up an account with an American stockbroker easily. And I've done some videos in the past about investing. Usually they're not that popular, so I don't do that many. But yeah, if you want me to do some more, put a comment in the comment section below and I'll do some more videos. And the next prediction for 2026 is AI. Now, everyone's talking about AI. They're talking about how AI is going to take everyone's jobs and everyone's going to be jobless. And yeah, it's going to be the end of the world. And I agree, AI is a big thing. And yeah, definitely a lot of jobs will shift to AI. But people love to talk about doom and gloom and how this horrible thing's going to happen because of something. I remember in the year 2000, you had that Y2K bug, and how all the computers were going to crash because they couldn't change the date from 1999 to 2000, and the whole world was going to collapse. Well, that didn't happen. And before that, I remember the world population is growing too quickly and food production won't be able to keep up. Be chaos in food production, but then they just managed to improve agriculture, and that wasn't a problem either. So you've got many of these examples, but that isn't downplaying the fact that AI will have fundamental impacts on people, that's for sure, and unfortunately many will lose jobs, but it will take time, and there are some good opportunities in investing in some AI companies. I mean, I personally think Amazon, Google, and Nvidia are the key ones. I mean, I don't think OpenAI will be one of the big AI companies. I see them a bit like Netscape. So don't you remember Netscape? So that was the big web browser that everyone was using in the late 1990s. And everyone's like, oh, this is the big internet company. But then it disappeared when Microsoft Internet Explorer arrived, and then later Google. And I think OpenAI might go in the same way as Netscape. Because other players like Google and Amazon and maybe Meta, they just have so much more cash which they can throw at these, and so many intelligent people working there as well, while OpenAI needs to borrow so much money in order to keep operating, and I just don't see how they can compete against Google and Amazon. And then my final prediction is on natural disasters. Now, unfortunately, this always happens around the world. Here in Brazil, it seems to be mainly flooding and forest fires up to now. So the forest fires last year and previous years, they happened a lot in the Amazon region, also a bit around Sao Paulo, in Paraná as well. But in the far south of Brazil, so Santa Catarina, Rio Grande do Sul, that wasn't really that affected by forest fires. But the smoke from those fires from the other states did make its way down to the south of Brazil. So we did have some days where the air pollution deteriorated, but that was more or less it. And the flooding happens in many areas in Brazil, but the south of Brazil gets affected a lot by the flooding. So in 2024, there was this big flood in Rio Grande do Sul, with various cities being totally flooded. Also in the state of Santa Catarina, there have been various floods as well before. So yeah, there's definitely a big risk that there will be some flooding in 2026 as well. Now again, many people look to the government to resolve this, but I also think that you need to look, what can you do personally? So if you're looking to buy a house in the south of Brazil, don't buy a house near a river or down in a valley, because you're just asking for trouble. And then also with heavy rains, you can have some landslides as well. So again, don't buy houses on some steep hills or something, which have had landslide problems in the past. So this is definitely something you'd consider if you're planning to move to this part of the country. Okay, so I hope you liked this video. I mean, I made some really controversial predictions for 2026, but I'm not arrogant enough to think that I know what's going to happen in 2026. I'm just sharing my views and what I'm doing to make sure 2026 is a great year for me. So if you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe, leave any comments in the comment section below. So thanks for watching, until next time.